Welcome back, gang. It's Deltia from Deltiasgaming.com here with a tier list for Thrones and Liberty. This is going to be a general overview of how the weapons, which are essentially classes, play out, their strengths, pros and cons, and who should pick them up and why. So this individual tier list is going to be a broad aspect of how these weapons perform throughout the variety of Thrones and Liberty. During release, you're probably going to be leveling and sorting through which weapons and offhand combinations to use, and that's what I'm here to answer. What's really powerful and why? So if you got something out of this video, hit that thumbs up, check the link in the description for written guides, and let's get started. Up first is the C tier weapon, the Crossbow. The reason we rank the Crossbow in C tier is it got nerfed substantially from the closed and open betas previously. The biggest change with the Crossbow is that it's mid-range, not long-range like the staff and the Longbow. So the reason we rank Crossbow here in this position is it's very versatile. It's an awesome weapon to put on the offhand if you have no idea what to do and you want some type of range damage. The Crossbow is really focused on mobility and single target damage. So the passive will give you a little bit more damage after you use a mobility skill. So you're constantly strafing, dodging, jumping around, and keeping mobile. It's also good for PvP, obviously, where the game is revolved around strafing and avoiding targets. Crossbow does have really good single target damage as well, and kind of some fun buffs and debuffs, making it a really good DPS weapon, kind of a mid-range type of weapon. It does lack in the AoE department, so that's what kind of holds it back from others on this list. And your defensive skill is really fun dodge roll, and you can kind of just kite enemies endlessly. So it's an excellent all-around weapon. Great single target, it has range, and it is so versatile. That's what I love about it. It's going to be a little bit lower DPS than some other weapons, and it's going to be focused on single target. It's kind of like the jack of all trades for range weapons. So in my opinion, the best offhand combination for the Crossbow right now is Crossbow and Longbow. That is like single target, super sweat, blast a single target down, but you're gonna lack AoE. Also, another good combination is Crossbow and Tome. This can play well as a support role, similar to the Longbow and Tome, or just have really high survivability and mobility. So not the best weapon, but it's really fun and versatile if you don't know what to pick up and you want something in your offhand that has a little bit of range damage. However, it's lower DPS, almost entirely single target focus, and with the staff giving you max range, it's just better most of the time to put a staff on your back bar than a crossbow, unless you need the mobility specifically. Therefore, we keep the Crossbow in this position. Up next is Sword and Shield coming in at B tier. So the Sword and Shield is your actual tank weapon. So the Sword and Shield uses a skill called Provoking Roar, which is provoke is the taunt mechanism in this game, and also aggression. So you're going to be using abilities to basically get aggro and or taunt bosses. The Sword and Shield is amazing for survivability, so it's kind of the opposite of the staff. Its real purpose is just to be survivable, debuff, help the group, and also keep yourself alive. But just like every other MMORPG, everyone needs a tank for group play, whether it's PvE and sometimes PvP, but no one really wants to play it. Especially if you're leveling or new to the game, it isn't flashy, it's a bit slow when it comes to leveling, and you lack a lot of AoE damage. Now at endgame, both in PvE and PvP, it's almost mandatory in almost all the content because the survivability and some of the buffs and debuffs are so handy. But it's usually that other players want someone else to play the tank to do a dungeon, and it's not for you. But the strengths are it has great survivability, and it can reflect damage, and it's really fun to play. In fact, you can taunt, which is basically the provoke mechanic, and you have damage reduction for your group, and that is helpful. This specific weapon type is centered on group play, so if you're a solo player, it may not be best to have all these skills that help your allies out. Now it's going to have lower damage, it's really support focused, and leveling specifically with this is going to be brutal. Now the best combination you can use for Sword and Shield in my opinion is Sword and Shield with the Greatsword. So that's going to do is both melee weapons, but Greatsword has a lot of AoE damage. So it has stuns, AoE damage, has a gap closer, so it fits really nice in the survivability of Sword and Shield. You can also use Sword and Shield with the Wand. The Wand is the healing weapon, so that will allow you to basically keep yourself alive and or allies. It will be hard to mana sustain. But that is like the never die tank setup. So pick up a sword and shield if you love group play and you're tired of waiting on a tank endlessly to do a dungeon and or PvP. Up next, we have the staff in A tier. So the staff plays like your typical wizard, mage, huge, massive AoE damage and flashy animations. If you just want something that looks really cool, well, the staff is it. It does a lot of AoE damage. The staff is really strong when you're just trying to power level and just get through tons and tons of mobs, but it does lack in a lot of areas, particularly survivability. It has a huge major downside. What I found the staff useful to use is an offhand versus your main hand. That changes up some of the stats and how the passives interact with your weapons. So a staff can work really well with a longbow that lacks maybe AoE damage, but when it's your main hand primary weapon, you feel very, very squishy. However, the staff does have a cool crowd control ability, and it does rely on status effects. So the gameplay loop is essentially applying a status effect, and then once that is applied, to use particular abilities that do more damage once the status effect is applied. So it's rotation heavy, it has very long cooldowns, and some of the abilities require a channel time, so it's just not as fast paced and interesting for me. However, it has great range, AoE damage, and it's wonderful for power leveling. If you like playing a mage, you're probably going to want to play this in Throne and Liberty. Just realize it is very, very squishy. I would rank the staff higher if it had more survivability mechanics beyond a CC and a knockback and some snares. Moving on to the wand, and that is B+ tier. So consider the wand, in my opinion, one of the best weapons for solo players due to healing and crowd control. So healing in the game, you can't have like little potions. You have these world tree leaves that kind of just passively heal you, and some specific skills outside of wand do a healing. Specifically the longbow. Besides that, most DPS classes have no mechanism to heal themselves. So that's where the wand comes into play. If you use it as a main hand weapon, it's really intended to be a healer weapon, but it shines an offhand weapon. So if you need survivability on that, say that staff, and you're tired of getting nuked all the time, you throw a wand on your back bar, unlock some of those healing spells and even crowd control, and bang, you're ready to go. So that's where the wand shines, is that it's awesome when you're solo or you're leveling and you just need to heal. Also, wands have curse and some damage over time and some kind of fun little gameplay mechanics that do some AoE. So it's not going to be a great damage dealing weapon, but it's not just healing buffs and support. It does do a little bit of damage. So it's a perfect weapon to complement a build that lacks in survivability, and it has range, which is also nice. So again, the wand, great for solo players and or group PvE support. It's going to have weaker damage, and it's going to be more support focus, and it's going to require kiting, especially if it's your main hand weapon, so running around in a circle and avoiding enemies. So I'd recommend picking up the wand if you want to focus as a primary healer in your group, or you want an offhand weapon to go with like the longbow and be a PvP sweat lord that is really, really good. And the longbow and the wand have this really cool blend of good DPS weapon with the longbow, and both of those weapons heal and support their allies, making it one of the best combinations in the game. It's just your longbow will go on your main hand, the wand will go on your offhand. And also, we've already talked about a wand, sword, and shield if you want just incredible survivability. Also, this is really good for the solo tower, so if you're stuck in that solo tower, throw a wand on your back bar. Moving on to the next A tier, and that's Dagger A+ tier. So before I get into the Dagger, this was reworked dramatically if you ever played the closed and or open betas. So these skills align more with the Korean server, and it got a really big buff. So what the Dagger focuses on now is critical hit and poison damage. So it feels like your typical assassin build, and it evolves around maintaining that poison damage over time and doing more damage when the enemies fall below 50% health. You have kind of a built-in execute. You have a gap closer as well that's really powerful, and you have stealth camouflage. So you have that unique component that assassin rogue type players will love. However, you have to play in melee range, so melee damage dealers are really fun to play, but sometimes it's just so much easier to sit back and pew pew pew. So the Dagger's pros, you got tons of critical, and the high critical is what makes the Dagger so good via the passives. So this is one of those weapons you're going to see tons of builds just using in the offhand, primarily just for a couple skills and that critical bonus. You're going to have great mobility as well, so similar to the Crossbow in terms of like the gap closer and just highly mobile due to the passive and active skills. And you're gonna have a lot of burst damage, big heavy emphasis on crit and critical hit damage. So the dagger's cons, it's gonna require constant positioning. You know, you're gonna play in melee range, you get the strafe, kite, try to get the flank, try to get the rear of enemies, and that's somewhat hard. You could say this is a PvP focused weapon due to its burst. So in PvE, you're really gonna use some of the abilities, maybe the poison and the passives, since you're gonna need to cycle through those buffs and or debuffs. It makes it a little bit more difficult to manage. The best pairing, in my opinion, for the dagger is dagger and greatsword, one of the best builds out there right now, if not the best, arguably. And with the greatsword, you're gonna get tons more AoE damage and survivability. So that's what the common theme you're gonna see is greatsword and dagger build. And dagger essentially can work in the offhand of any weapon type because of those damage over time and the passive benefit. Very, very good versatile weapon due to the passives and active skills. Now we're getting to our final two, and you could rank them 1 and 2 in either order depending on what content you're gonna play. So I'm just gonna rank them based on what I felt was best when I played. And I'm gonna rank the greatsword number 2 in S tier, and the longbow number 1 in S+, and here's why. The greatsword is essentially the best melee weapon. It has incredible AoE damage, but also built-in survivability, and it's pretty easy to play. It's your typical Rambo in, stun an enemy, spin to win, do AoE damage, or single target. So it's not necessarily just a tank weapon, but it has that survivability component that makes it a little bit better than the dagger and some others. If you're a PvP player, it's going to be awesome due to the crowd control that you have, and you do a lot more damage once an enemy is crowd controlled. That's why the greatsword and dagger work so well together. And the dagger is great if you're going to play a tank and have sword and a shield in the offhand or main hand, because there are some skill specializations that can add aggression. So it does well in that context either. So it's very, very good for PvE, DPS, tanking, and or PvP. The major downside of the greatsword is it requires you to be in melee range. You're going to constantly have to gap close to keep your high uptime. But it has incredible AoE skills. It's hard to fit all of the skills on your bars. What you run into is like it has great single target, great AoE, you need some stuns, you need some survivability, and you just run out of bar space. And it's flashy and fun. So great AoE damage, crowd control, and you can combine it with a sword and shield to be very, very tanky, even playing in melee range. But you lack range and are relying on those gap closers and mobility. You're offhand dependent to really make this shine. And it's overall one of the strongest weapons, if not arguably the strongest in the game. I would say if you're a typical player that loves playing melee DPS, do greatsword on your main hand and dagger on the offhand. If you're struggling with survivability, put sword and shield on your offhand, and you'll have a wonderful time leveling and hitting endgame with this weapon choice. Moving on to my favorite and what I think is the strongest overall is the longbow in S+ tier. Now, full disclosure, I typically almost always play the meathead melee builds. When I picked up the longbow, I was just absolutely blasting everything and nothing could even touch me. Moreover, I had the ability to heal myself. And in MMOs, I can't stand games where you can't heal yourself and you're relying on someone else to heal you. That's in dungeons and PvP and so on. That's why I gravitated toward the longbow over the greatsword. Longbow was changed more so to have a little bit more emphasis on support and healing. So this is really good when you're leveling, you're playing solo, you're playing PvP, and you don't have a pocket healer buddy running around spamming you with swift healing all the time. That's why I love the longbow. It has incredible single target damage at range. The longbow's playstyle is you want to kind of stay stationary at max range for the max amount of damage, and you bind targets in place and then burst them. You have these cool mechanics where your abilities can come off cooldown and use them back to back consecutively, and it just feels really, really fun to pew everything at range and belt it. But the offhand choice is critical to make this shine, whether you're going to heal with a wand and tome, or you want something else like a crossbow for even more single target damage. Very, very critical. So Longbow's pro. It has some of the best damage in the game depending on your offhand selection, or it can support and heal. And what I love is you play at range. That is so nice to be able to hang back and pew everything. And it's pretty easy to play. Once you get the rotation down, 3 or 4 skills, one of them comes off cooldown, and you use it back to back, super fun. And the best for me is self-healing. I love being able to heal myself, playing solo, not dependent on other people. Maybe I'm just antisocial. Leave me a comment if you think so. Longbow's cons is it's offhand dependent, so you're going to have to make sure you pick a wand or a tome or a crossbow or something very specific, otherwise it's not going to do that well. It's going to be stationary for highest DPS. You don't have to stay stationary, but you want to be furthest back, sitting stationary. Well, that's not always going to be possible in PvE or PvP to get the most damage out of this thing, so you got to be aware of that, constantly keeping your range at max distance. And the longbow in the tower, the solo tower, was a bit tough because the NPCs obviously come towards you, and it's very hard to keep that max range benefit, where melee really shined in the solo tower. So the longbow is my favorite weapon and what I think is the best overall because it's powerful for every type of player due to its range and its ability to heal themselves and other players actually. So when you're playing in a dungeon with a bunch of randoms that are dying all the time, popping a big heal with a longbow can save your party from a wipe. Or you're a PvP sweat lord and you're just about dead and you boom, pop up a heal, you can get that last greatsword player down. My suggestion to you is do longbow and wand. You will have great survivability, damage, and the wand will do a little bit of AoE for you to compensate for the lack of it with the longbow skills being kind of weak in the AoE department. Well, gang, I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, leave me a comment below, like, subscribe. Check out the links below for different Throne and Liberty builds, and we will see you next time.